So welcome everybody. I'm going to mute everyone right now just to make life a tad bit easier. We've been doing this now since the beginning of April and it's really loads of fun, and we're going to be continuing it through most of June at least. We may go even further than that. Tonight, as you know, we're going to be talking about Upper Montclair. Next week, I've been working on a presentation where I've been going painstakingly through the Montclair Times for 1918, so I could track what was going on during the Spanish flu epidemic instead. So as sort of a comparison, it's very interesting to me to see how some things are very similar and some things are not. So I hope you tune into that next week. It is also on at noon and at 7 p.m. We are a nonprofit. We are not part of the town. We scrape by as best we can, and this has sort of put a crimp in some of our bigger fundraisers. So if you are enjoying these programs and you want to throw a little money our way, it would be greatly appreciated. Even $5 would be helpful. You can do it by Venmo, which a lot of people are using now because it's a really contactless way to do anything. You can do it by Venmo. Look up Montclair History Center. My name will pop up, but that's not really where it's going. It's going to the Montclair History Center. You can do it on our website. It says join or donate. Click that. We'd love it if you became a member. If not, a donation would be great. And then finally, we do accept the old-fashioned check. I am going into the office about once a week and getting anything that does come in. So thank you very much for that. So with that, I will turn it over to Helen, who is vice president on our board. Helen is amazing. The research she does is always excellent. She is sort of one of our chief communicators. She helps us design programs. She totes herbs when necessary. I mean, she's really an all-around huge help to us. And I love having her do a presentation because A, I always learn a lot, and B, I always have a lot of fun.
Hi, everybody. And thanks, Jane, for that nice introduction. And of course, I developed this show with Lisa Ann Renner, who I've learned a lot about research and communicating from her. So Lisa Ann, you're gonna speak up whenever you want to. This was a walking tour that we did, and then we turned it into a slideshow. And Lisa Ann and I have done a couple programs together, so she can pipe up if I forget anything. So what we're going to focus on today is the period from the 1880s to 1930s, which was the period of the most exponential growth in town. And when we were really transitioning from a farming area to the suburb with an identity linked to New York City. If you're tuning in, except for my sister and brother-in-law who are tuning in, who are less familiar with Montclair, I assume most of the rest of you are familiar with Montclair and know that the British settled sort of the Bloomfield Avenue area in Montclair Center, and the Dutch were up here in Upper Montclair. So the Cranes were down in Montclair Center at Cranetown. Up here was called Speertown. That was one of the Dutch families. And so those were the names of these areas, but really originally this whole area was considered part of Newark, and then we would be considered part of Bloomfield, and we would be called West Bloomfield, but before we became our own township of Montclair. And the reason first, the mountain was the first draw for the British moving out of the crowded Newark area, and the Dutch settlers who were moving down from Bergen County and Passaic County, and they were drawn to First Mountain. We are on the eastern slope of First Mountain. It's a small mountain, but a real mountain. We're the first ridge west of New York City, and this location had lots of advantages for farming and for healthy air, for beauty. So they were first drawn to the mountain. And the area around Bloomfield Avenue developed much sooner than up here in Upper Montclair. The Dutch farmers were a little more reticent to hand over the farm, but eventually, as the trains came in and things changed, development and the sprawl of the 1800s made its way up here also. And I I just want to make sure that I mentioned that Lisanne is the historian for Friends of Anderson Park. So I was researching something way up in the northern parts of Montclair. She was the expert on Anderson Park, and we discovered that we overlapped a little bit. So we ended up doing this program together. I had the same issue when I was, I have to figure out, hang on. Get the slide to go. Hang on. Technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this map shows the Upper Montclair Historic District. It is a 7-block district that was designated by the township as a historic district in 2006. And it's basically the area we're going to cover today. And by being a historic district, it does have some extra layers of protection. So changes to the buildings and things like that have some extra layers of review by the Historic Preservation Commission and things like that. In this small area, there's 9 landmarks, and we'll see every one of those except the private home, and they'll be marked with this little landmark symbol. You know, the thing that really transformed Montclair into what we recognize today is the train. And you probably have seen this graphic before if you've seen any of my presentations. Adam Grace, Lisanne's husband, developed this graphic to show the exponential growth of our population from the time the trains were introduced to, you know, to the 1930s when we really reached our peak. But so our population exploded, it grew by 700% in 50 years. So in 1880, we were at about 5,100 residents, and by 1930, we were at 42,000. And when you look at when the first train service was introduced from Hoboken to Lackawanna Plaza in 1856, and you know, everybody realized that they could come out to this great mountainside location, not just for day trips or for a summer vacation, but they could live here and commute just like so many of us do today, or used to do in the before time world. And so they wanted more train service. We are a long, skinny town. So they wanted a second train line. And eventually we got one in 1873 that went from Jersey City to Walnut Street in Montclair and all the way up to Montclair Heights in Montclair. And that second train line really spurred the growth in Upper Montclair, the development in Upper Montclair. And this suburbanization was happening in lots of other places that were serviced by trains. So it wasn't just us, but it had a lasting impact on Montclair. This 1878 map will give you a sense of how things looked before the big boom, the big development boom happened. So to get your bearings, this is Bellevue Avenue. Here's the train track. Here's the first station when this was the Montclair Railroad. Here's Valley Road. Here's Bradford Avenue, what's called Van Guysen's Gap. Anderson Park is not there yet, but so you can see a single track railroad. That was what it was originally. And these little boxes are structures. So there aren't that many structures in Upper Montclair in this 1878 map. But here's the first station. This photo is from 1888, and Montclair Township was created because we wanted the second train line. We wanted West Bloomfield. We wanted Bloomfield to get a second train line to service the upper parts of West Bloomfield, but Bloomfield wasn't interested in taking on that debt. So ultimately, a group of influential and you know, powerful residents who had moved here for to commute and who moved here and commuted into the city were able to get the state legislature to make Montclair its own township. They also changed our name from West Bloomfield. The choices were, they had a vote. The choices were Hillside, Eagleton, Claremont, and Montclair. And Montclair actually wasn't the winner. Eagleton was the winner. And if you watch Parks and Rec, you'll know that Eagleton is where the snooty people live. But so Pratt, I think his name was William Pratt, didn't like Eagleton. He was a very powerful guy. He ended up making the final sway to make it Montclair. This picture is of the Upper Montclair train station from about 1900, and then 2014. And so this was one of 5 Montclair stations along on the first Montclair Railroad that then became the Greenwood Lake of the Erie Railroad. And so you can see that that little shack from the Montclair Railroad days was replaced by a much more typical Erie Railroad design. This was a rustic shingle style Erie Railroad station. It was actually destroyed by a fire in 2006 and rebuilt pretty faithfully in 2010. And it is on the National Register. It's still a landmark despite New Jersey Transit's attempts to take it off the register. This is a view of the other side of the station. So the tracks would be over on this side. And so this is now a parking lot. This is the De Novo restaurant. But you notice in 1910, it was all grassy. This was referred to as Little Anderson Park. And of course, today it's a parking lot, much needed parking lot. And around this time, it wasn't just wealthy business people who were moving to Montclair. Also, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of artists were moving here. They appreciated the fact that this Montclair was half country, half city. They had the inspiration and the space and the greenery and the beauty of a country setting, but they were close enough to get into the city to sell their work and make money. So it was, so I think half country, half city, or where the city meets the suburbs, that's still our slogan today. Still working for us. Here's a typical family from 1904. This is Janet Moore and her kids. Her husband Henry was an insurance executive. They lived on Park Street. They're at the Upper Montclair station, you know, all dressed up to catch the train for something. And people moved away from New York because of conditions like this one, crowded, congested, probably bad air. One thing they said over and over again about Montclair was the healthful air, the healthful mountain air. Talk about that a lot. And in the early 1900s, as after the railroads were introduced, there was tons, and the farms were turning over. The development was very active, and there were lots of realty companies that were selling, building spec homes, and there were at least 3 real estate offices within a half block of the Upper Montclair station. This one, Montclair Realty Company, in their ad from the city directory, called Montclair New York's most charming suburb. And you know, I wonder if in the Maplewood city directory they called Maplewood New York's most charming suburb, perhaps. But we like it. This quote that was spoken by Colonel Frederick Harris in 1876 sort of sums up how the railways impacted Montclair. They have completely changed the character of our town from a sparsely settled agricultural region to a community of elegant suburban homes. And we could spend the next 50 slides looking at the elegant suburban homes, and that's a whole other slideshow, so we're not going to do that. We're focusing more on the business district, but it sure did have an impact on the way our town looks and what we enjoy. This is just one home. I find that people are surprised that Benjamin Moore lived in Montclair. He lived in this house on Upper Mountain Avenue. He didn't build it, but he lived there in the early 1900s. He moved here from Brooklyn, like so many other people did. This is at 345 Upper Mountain Avenue. And so a lot of people with money were moving and enjoying the living on this slope of the eastern slope of First Mountain, but also there was a lot of industry that depended on the railroad, not just the commuters. So for example, this is the Studio Players, which is near the, what's it called, the Acme. And originally it was the Adams Morgan radio factory. And there were lots of instances of industry along the railroad tracks. Dumont, who created the first commercial television set, one of his first factories was along right by the Bel Air house where Brick Lane is. And oh, by the way, these are some ads for Adams Morgan radio. There was also a big lumber yard right, I'm sure many of you remember where the Charlie Brown's was. So a lot of the industry, or some of the big lumber yards, had their own sidings that shot right off the rail line. And so this serviced the lumber yard so they could transport their goods or receive goods. And this was the Osborne and Marsellis yard. That they had a quarry, they sold lumber. It's behind the Bellevue movie theater where the old Charlie Brown's was. So here's another view of it. So this is the Osborne Marsellis yard. This was the siding that went through their yard, and this is what it looked like a few years ago. So Anderson Park is over here, and Anderson Park would be over here in this picture here. Now we're going up to Bellevue Avenue, and we're standing right on the tracks, looking east towards Valley Road, which is about here. So you can see all these wood frame buildings. You know, it looks like something out of the, you know, like old timey, you know, Little House on the Prairie or something. But so and that was pretty common construction. We date this picture to 1901 because the flag refers to McKinley and Roosevelt. So we dated this to, at least Ann dated this to 1901. And you can see the unpaved streets and the wood frame buildings, and that would change. Another view, this time looking west towards First Mountain. We're standing on the apartment building on the corner of Valley and Bellevue, and we're looking west. So in this picture, you can see what had been Little Anderson Park, the grassy area that's now a parking lot. But you can see the train station is there in the old picture. This is one of our favorite buildings. Lisa and I are both really taken with the trunk building. You can see why it's called the trunk building because of its distinctive shape. It wasn't around for very long. It's at 260 to 264 Bellevue Avenue, the current site of the Bellevue Theater. It was one of the original mixed-use buildings. It had a grocer, a dry cleaner, insurance agents. There was a conference space for meetings. It was built in the late 1890s, and it was the land was owned by Charles Anderson, who owned and developed much of today's Upper Montclair. But it was demolished in 1921 to make room for the Bellevue Theater. And it's great. The shape is great. When you're looking at some old aerial photos, it's a real help to get your bearings when you see the trunk building. Here's another shot of the Bellevue Theater soon after it opened in 1922. And I know Lisa Ann is just raring to go on the 100th anniversary of the Bellevue Theater. So we're all excited that the new owners have taken over the Bellevue Theater. I ran out this afternoon and took a picture of, I had a picture from like 2014, but I went out and got a new picture today. And so we know that the developers are going to develop this space into, because I know there's people on the call that may not have been in town lately. So Bellevue Theater briefly closed. It's being reopened with a restaurant, a bar, and multiple theaters. This had been a hair salon up here for many years. That's going to all be part of the restaurant or the theaters. And so hopefully that will, their plans will stay on track, and we'll be glad to see that busy site again as a movie theater. And it's really fun to see the interior of the original theater. It's so grand and huge. And of course, I don't know that any of us saw it in this condition, because it you know, they chopped it up into a million little theaters. And it's probably going to be a bunch of little theaters again, but it'll be interesting to see if the current developers lean towards any of this original architecture. And this is a picture of the Highgate Hall. It was a tea room up in where the hair salon had been. And people who frequented the Highgate Hall remember that these murals changed frequently. And you know, the Highgate Hall was here from the 1920s to 1940s, and it was like a fancy tea room. And the name of the developers who are redoing the Bellevue, I think they're called Highgate Hall, or they're called Highgate Development. So hopefully they will be looking back to the history, and it'll make it interesting. Lisa Ann got this picture of one day a workman, well, sort of brings your attention to this. In order to enhance the perception of how high the building, the roof is, the slates at the bottom down here are actually larger than the slates up at the top. So to create more of an optical illusion, an even greater height for the roof. Now going on to another building on Bellevue Avenue, this one on the corner of Bellevue and Valley. It was, so we're talking about this building here, which was originally built in 1908 as the Fox and Company dry goods store. And so you can see when it was a retail establishment, it had these big retail windows. This building was built by Charles Anderson. It was the first apartment building in Upper Montclair. it was built in Georgian Revival style. Then in 1933, a bank took it over, and you can see that the windows were changed to something a little bit more bank-like. And so the Montclair Trust took it over. If you'll see in another picture, the facade along Valley Road, you can still see the ghost of the letters that say Montclair Trust. And also on Valley Road, you can, if Vesta, the little chocolate shop ever opens up again, you can see the vault. Every retail outlet that's had the space that included the vault has included the vault in their display space. So it's pretty cool. And oh, now we'll talk about Francis Nelson, Lisa Ann's favorite architect. He designed lots of important buildings in Upper Montclair. He lived in Montclair, and you'll see his picture next to some of the buildings that he designed. So for example, this building at 242 Bellevue, right next to the apartment. So this was the Fox Dry Goods in the apartment building. So here's the post office that was built in 1918. It was designed by Nelson, and it is a landmark. It was among the first Tudor buildings in this district, and it really set the tone for the dominant style of architecture. It was built by Charles and Robert Anderson. And across the street, at the northwest corner of Bellevue and Valley, we see Park Pharmacy. So there was a pharmacy. This was Park Pharmacy, a wood frame building. Right across the street was another pharmacy. There were other pharmacies in the block. There were pharmacies everywhere you turned. But so you can see that by 1914, that wood frame building had been converted to a nice neoclassical brick building. The First National Bank, it was built by Crowe, Lewis, and Wickenhoffer, a New York City architectural firm. And so here's the clock that we all know. The clock is now like somewhere over here, but originally it was over here. And the building pretty much has been very well preserved. It looks very much the same. One difference is, if you notice, like on this little section back here, there's an addition now. Lisa Ann and I were lucky enough to talk our way into the bank and got them to show us what was up here. So this is like a conference room, and we actually walked out on the roof and we took some pictures and things like that. And we got to see some of the back areas of the bank. If you're familiar with this Chase Bank, there, when you go in at the back wall, you can see the vault, I guess, or the whatever, yeah, the vault. But above that was an open mezzanine level that had a lot of brass detailing and railings, and that's all been walled over. But we got to see that when we were able to get the little tour of the bank. And you can see even by 1920, when this postcard was from, the Tudor is starting to surround, you know, the block is starting to get more Tudor revival designed buildings. This is a picture, you can see the trolley going up Valley Road. And so the Valley Road was formerly referred to as Speertown Road. It connected Speertown and Cranetown. Trolleys ran along Valley Road from the 1890s to 1928. The number 57 went, well, so originally the trolleys traveling north stopped at Jerome Avenue. That's why the area around Jerome Avenue is so wide. It's said because the trolley had to turn around there. But when Montclair, well, the normal school, which is now Montclair State University, was built in 1906 to 1908, they extended the trolley all the way up to Normal Avenue so that the students could use the trolley as a form of transportation. The trolleys on Bloomfield Avenue ran much longer until the 50s. This is a neat postcard from around 1911. So it shows the trolley traveling north on Valley Road towards Bellevue Avenue. So you have the Anderson building here with the big retail windows. Here's the wood frame Park Pharmacy on this side, now the Chase Bank. There's another pharmacy here, and over here is St. James Church. This is another, great shot. You can see the trunk building here. You can see the retail windows on the Anderson building. There's the clock. So now we've got the newer windows on the Anderson building, the theater, and this bunting. The reason we placed this to 1918, 1919 is that the bunting says welcome home. So it was sort of welcome home from the World War I veterans. And now this map from 1906, I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of why did this strip become, you know, so consistently Tudor revival. In this 1906 map, you can see that, so here's, this is the trolley track going up Valley Road. Here's the double track now. We have a double track railroad, but this is Bellevue, here's Valley, here's Lorraine. I mean, there's like nothing here. We don't have the building where Dunkin' Donuts is, or Williams-Sonoma, or Jackie's Ferlet. So there's still a lot of open space. So we know that there were lots of ideas for what to do in this block. And this, what's shown here is a rendering for what was a really grand plan that never really materialized the way that they planned. This was from 1912, and a real estate syndicate wanted to develop the whole block as one big Tudor style development that, you know, what you're looking, this would have been what you would have seen when you off the train and at the Upper Montclair station. This, you would have been greeted by this fountain, this, it's very handsome, yes. And so that was the idea. And that's not quite how it materialized. This is what you see. So, you know, they were hoping you would get this great first impression, and it's sort of a hodgepodge. It didn't really happen that way, even though the Tudor happened on the Valley Road side, didn't happen on the back. But you can see that if at first, I mean, if you weren't really paying attention, you just think, well, here's a bunch of Tudor buildings, or maybe it's one big Tudor building. But if you look closely, they have different roof lines, they have different timber treatments, you know, detailing. So actually it was, you know, somebody owned all this property, and it seems that when he sold it off in lots, there may have been an encouragement or a guidance to develop it in the Tudor revival style. And that's how we got this consistent look. This is a little section. We happen to, somehow we have this elevation for this little section that is now Dunkin' Donuts. And this is a particularly sad little section because really they've lost lots of the timbers, lots of the details. I mean, they still have the roof or the little peak details here, but they've lost a lot of the other timbers that would be here to really make it scream Tudor revival. And of course, this section, for those of you who live in town and remember Chapman's, which then became the Olympic stores, I mean, you know, this, there's nothing to remember about Tudor here. So, you know, the Olympic store, this was redone in the 60s, and this could have been this look could have been a combination of 60s design, plus the fact that, you know, we were soon after the riots in Newark, so this might have been considered a safer design should something like that happen again. But now what's in that space now is sort of a modern interpretation of Tudor revival. And this indicates, this is an illustration of what happens in a historic district. So this was redeveloped, but with some guidance from the Historic Preservation Commission. So it's not old-timey Tudor revival, but it does speak to the Tudor revival, and it's more in context with the other buildings around it. So a lot of people consider this a successful redevelopment and a successful use of historic preservation guidance. And where all this Tudor revival, you know, where was it inspired by? It was inspired by the real Tudor architecture. This is late as the 1500s in London. This was the Staple Inn in London. That's a lot of timbering going on there. That's pretty cool. And Tudor revival business districts were happening all over the country, but ours we've been able to maintain and, you know, and keep it, which has made Upper Montclair particularly attractive. So now continuing up to the corner of Valley and Lorraine, here is what now Williams-Sonoma. It was built as a Masonic Temple in 1920 by Francis Nelson. There he is. And it's a Flemish revival style. It's the tallest structure in Upper Montclair. Continuing further on Valley Road was the Valley Diner. So this is 636 Valley. This is would be between today's King's and the gas station. Originally, it looked like this on the left. It was air cooled, whatever that meant, not quite air conditioned. And then in 1939, it was redone for this with this modern Art Deco look. And they served soda sandwiches. In the 50s, we know that kids called it the BD, like being a little naughty. But it was a popular place to go. And so here's where it was. It would have been like where this parking lot is now for the bank. This is a shot of, now we're looking south on Valley Road. We're looking at the east side of the street. And so the interesting thing about this block in particular is how many businesses started in this block, and maybe they moved across the street or down the street, but they're still around. So for example, Saunders Hardware, which is here, Saunders had a connection to a hardware store in this block since 1893 under different names, slightly different locations. And Engelbeck's, which is in this building, has been there since 1933. They opened during Prohibition as a grocer. We'll talk about that later. Mullen Kronberg, I think this is Mullen Kronberg, the dry cleaners, started there in 1911, and in 1930 moved around the corner to Lorraine Avenue, where they still are today. And further down, we have what was the Montclair Charbroil. It had been Louvis's, now it's the Montclair Diner. So that, Frank, you can pipe up if I have this wrong, but I believe that started in 1923 across the street. And so those are just some of the businesses that have had a long time connection to this block in particular. So when Lisa Ann and I were researching this tour, I stopped in at Engelbeck's and just was like, you got any history to tell us about? So I said Engelbeck started in 1933 as a grocer. That was the last year of Prohibition. So they were a little bit more than a grocer. The current owners of Engelbeck's are the von Hoffman family, and their grandfather told of going to the liquor store or going to Engelbeck's to buy groceries, which were on the top of his bag, but underneath the false bottom was his liquor. So they were ready to go when Prohibition was lifted. These are some pictures from the Lorraine Candy Shop. They're just fun pictures. Lorraine Candy Shop was in half of what is now Saunders, and there was a connection, a familial connection between the person who owned Lorraine Candy Shop and the Saunders. And here, this is an award-winning window display for the Lorraine Candy Shop, and I think it was on this side of Saunders Hardware. And we learned from Dick Saunders and his sister, so the Saunders family owned this until 1998 when Dick Saunders retired and sold it to Tom Bolte, who was the owner of South End Hardware and still owns it. But the Saunders, the family lived right around the corner, and in talking to other people whose families own businesses, many of the people, the business owners here lived either above the shop, across the street from the shop, around the corner from the shop. So, they were really, part of this community, living here, running businesses here. And these are some pictures that Saunders has in their store, just old-timey fun hardware store pictures. Having worked at my brother's hardware store, I particularly like these pictures of hardware store. And a lot of people remember Berners, the stationery store, which is where the Gap is now. This is just another fun shot. Lots of cars, lots of traffic. In fact, this is surprisingly few cars in the bottom picture. This was another pharmacy at right across from the Chase Bank, but had been across from the Park Pharmacy. In this picture, it's called Laubenheimer's. And one of the reasons why there were so many pharmacies was there were different things than what we expect to see at a pharmacy today. You could get sodas and ice creams and things like that. So these are some counters on the outside of Laubenheimer's where you could stand and have whatever you bought there. That's kind of neat. And so then this was a pharmacy for a long time. It was, people will also remember it as Smith's and then as Valvano's, or people called it Val's, before it became a bank, maybe in the 60s or 70s. And around the corner on Bellevue Avenue was Lempert Stationery. And you can see, so This building right here is this building. It's changed a little, but it's the same building. So it's fun to see those side by side. And continuing on Bellevue Avenue, we come to the Bellevue Avenue Library, which Lisanne has a whole show on Bellevue Avenue Library, and I'm just going to cover it really quickly. It was a Carnegie library designed by Nelson. It is a landmark. It celebrated 100 years in 2014, and so we had 2 Carnegie libraries in Montclair, which was very unusual. And there's lots of great things to see in the library. There's a lot of great detailing, woodwork, carvings above the door. And they really recently did some really great renovations there. They replaced the windows, so it's a very viable space. It's a great little space. I think they're going to be putting an elevator in also, so it's going to be around for a while. I'm going to cover some of the schools now. So the first school was Speertown School, or Mount Hebron School, and it was on the same corner where this Anderson building is, but it was kind of set back. It wasn't right up to the street. You can see the trunk building back here, so that helps us figure out where we are. And it was started as a Sabbath school, so you know, the kids would go there, I guess, on Sunday, and then there's a couple different schools of thought. Why are things called Mount Hebron? Why do we have Mount Hebron School, Mount Hebron Road, Mount Hebron Cemetery? So Mount Hebron in the Old Testament meant friendship, and so that seemed like a nice name for a school. There wasn't so much concern about separation of church and state, so who cared if you named a school after something from the Bible? But Lisanne you can unmute, because I do not remember the other reason why it's called Mount Hebron. I couldn't find that in my notes in time to include that here, but because we found another reason why Mount Hebron Cemetery was named Mount Hebron. And Lisanne can speak up whenever she wants to, or will tell us at the end. But anyways, this was the first school in Upper Montclair. Before it was a public school. It was a subscription school. It was a Sabbath school. It wasn't public. Schools weren't publicly supported until 1849. So that school moved down Bellevue Avenue to the current location of the Buzz Aldrin School, which was called Mount Hebron School. So this was the second iteration of the Mount Hebron School. Lots of changes. Sometimes they built on the same foundation. Sometimes they knocked it down. But so we got, it looked like this. Then in 1893, it looked like that. Lots and lots of changes. Today, it looks sort of like what you see on the right, and it's called the Buzz Aldrin School. The Women's Club of Upper Montclair. We have 2 women's clubs. The other one on Union Street is called the Women's Club. This is the Women's Club of Upper Montclair. It started before the Women's Club on Union Street started, by the way. And the Women's Club of Upper Montclair started in 1900. They met in homes, and they met in the Commonwealth Club, which is a men's club, which is within spitting distance of the Upper Montclair, of the Women's Club of Upper Montclair, right behind it. The men really didn't love having the women meet there, because they couldn't play pool or bowl in their shirt sleeves in the presence of women. So when the women got their own clubhouse, they were pretty happy. So you can see Nelson designed it. It's a landmark. The exterior is Colonial Revival, and the interior is Tudor Revival, just to mix it up a little bit. In this space, they've been great to us on our walking tours. They always have us in, and somebody comes and opens the doors for us. They rent this space, so if you need a rental, I encourage you to look there. So this came about because Charles Anderson said he would fund any organization who wanted to who would include a 1,000-seat auditorium. He would fund their building. So the Women's Club of Upper Montclair jumped on the opportunity, and they got themselves a building. And there was a lot of their focus was personal and civic betterment and women's empowerment. They addressed social issues such as racial inequality as early as the 1930s. Margaret Sanger spoke there in 1926 about birth control. Eleanor Roosevelt in 1931 spoke there and asked, "Are women shirking their duties in government?" So that was a kind of a happening place. And here's Bonds. A lot of people remember Bonds. We're back on Valley Road now, where this is the Bank of America today. So Bonds was there. This was their flagship store of a small chain. They had them in Cedar Grove and Verona and a couple other places. Bond's Ice Cream started out of the family's home on College Avenue, and then they had an ice cream stand in the parking lot by the train station and by the normal school. But eventually they built this building. They sold ice cream and, it was just a restaurant. You could go there for, a lot of families went there on Thursday when that was traditionally the night that the help had off. So a lot of families went there on Thursday, I was told. They also sold frozen food here even before the grocery stores did. And Bond's existed from 1934 to 1973, and they were famous for their awful milkshake, which is still available from the Newport Creamery. The name has been sold to the Newport Creamery in Rhode Island. You can still get one. Buzz Aldrin worked at Bond's when he was a youth. Many young people worked there. When the building was demolished in 1973, somebody was really so sad to see this big milkshake cup go into the dumpster. So he convinced Montclair State College at the time, could he just please store it there? So it was on they started on the tennis courts at Montclair State College until the college kids saw how fun it was to pick it up and move it around campus in the middle of the night. And so it didn't last very long, and ultimately they had to trash it. Another woman that I spoke to when this was all boarded up, the windows were all boarded up, someone had scrawled "Goodbye, old friend" on the wood. And so that sort of speaks to the affection that people had for Bonds. It was a very popular hangout. We've heard from many people. Of course, it probably wasn't as welcoming as if you were African American. We've also heard that. So we know that there was discrimination here just like every place else. Sort of across the street on Cooper Avenue there was a livery, Hart's Livery. It's kind of too bad that they lost this neat detailing up here, but that would have been right up here. But you can still see, if you look, you may not have noticed these big doors, but there's the big livery doors. A livery stable was like a horse for hire. They did pickup and delivery service for furniture and pianos. They stored things here. There was also a livery right across the street and where Talbot's is now. That was called the Commonwealth Stables. And so this particular building was also housed in organ factory, 1950 to 1979. And a woman who's, right, Jane, her father owned the organ factory. She was on the call this afternoon. Here's the Firehouse that was built in 1902. It's a landmark, not designed by Nelson, but by E.R. North, another notable architect who did many things in Montclair. North had been with McKim, Mead and White in New York, and he was also involved in the development of Irwin Park here in Montclair. It's in the Queen Anne style. It has rusticated brownstone, probably from some of our local quarries. And so you can see that horses were used in the early days to pull the equipment. Before horses, they pulled them by hand and just ran around dragging those things around. And then they had the horses, big improvement, until 1918. And the horses were discontinued in 1918. So this was Cliffside Hose Company number 4. This was their second location. Their first location was right around the corner on Bellevue Avenue, right next to the train tracks. It would have been right here where Anderson Park is. This was probably an old train-related building that they were using. But when Anderson Park was developed, all the structures had to be removed. So that's when they moved the Firehouse around. This Firehouse bell that is here had been donated to Cliffside Hose Company by Union Congregational Church when they moved from one church to another. And then when the hose company moved around the corner, they then passed this bell along to a fire company in Little Falls. And this structure, we're told, was moved down to the Montclair Golf Club on Grove Street, although we've not been able to pin it down exactly where it ended up. And of course, here we're on Bellevue, right by Anderson Park, and Lisanne does entire programs and walking tours of Anderson Park. This is an Olmsted designed park. Land was donated by Charles Anderson. It's part of the Essex County Park System, the first county-wide park system in the nation. It's 15 acres. It's a landmark. And the Friends of Anderson Park has done a tremendous job, very successfully working with the county to replant Anderson Park very much in keeping with the original Olmsted plans. And this aerial shows, so here's Anderson Park, and it shows what an important buffer Anderson Park is between the commercial and the residential in this part of town. Now we're leaping all the way down Bellevue Avenue to St. Cassian Church. And these are, so Jane, this is the new part that I changed from this afternoon. So St. Cassian Roman Catholic Church originally faced Norwood Avenue. It was a tiny little church. It was a mission church, an offshoot of the Immaculate Conception, which was all the way down on North Fullerton. And they said that they built this to meet the needs of the Irish help in Upper Montclair. So that in 1895, when this is built, it would have been tough for young women to get all the way down to Immaculate Conception and all kinds of weather. So this teeny tiny little church was built, 55 by 90 originally. Then it was expanded. It seated 320 people. But in 1992, the building was, just as I was getting ready to baptize my son, the church was deemed structurally unsound, and so it was demolished, and they totally reconfigured their site. So it's going to seem like I spend way too much time on St. Cassian's, but it's kind of hard to explain. And a woman who was watching from out of town today was like, they knocked down St. Cassian's? So I wanted to explain it a little bit more. And St. Cassian's, by the way, was a martyr. He was a teacher, and very, it's sort of gross. He died at the hands of his students who were made to stab him with their stylus, with their metal pens. Kind of like macabre. Let me see. So when the church was demolished, the priest moved from the rectory, which was also demolished, into the convent on Lorraine, and their parish offices were temporarily housed at St. James Church down the street. So here is a 1933-34 map. So you can see here's Bellevue Avenue. So the rectory used to be here facing Bellevue. That little church I just showed you used to face Norwood, right across the street from Mount Hebron. In 1934, the elementary school, St. Cassian Elementary School, wasn't there. But in this picture from the 50s, you can see the little church and the school under construction. Now, unfortunately, this is a sad little picture of the church around 1992 as it was being prepared for demolition, and you can see the church or the school there. And this is what it looks like. I just took this picture this afternoon. So the church would have been right here. And the rectory, this is the only picture I have of the rectory, which fronted Bellevue Avenue, where now the new church stands. This was the old rectory, and the church was behind it. So, and so that's how that came to be. In the new church, one of the windows, one of the stained glass windows has depicts the original cute little old church. And it also pays homage to St. James. His symbol was the clam shell, the scallop shell. So that's how they thanked St. James for letting them have that office space. Another church in the name, now we're on the church run here, Union Congregational on Cooper Avenue is another one that's a little confusing, so hang in there with me. So the Congregation for Union Congregational formed in 1881. By 1882, they built this church on Valley Road. So it was facing Valley Road south of Cooper Avenue. Then in 1900, they built this impressive structure on Cooper Avenue in Norman style with rusticated Pompton granite. And interestingly, this church was entirely lit by electricity, which was quite unusual in 1900. So when they vacated this original church, this is the bell that they gave to the Cliffside Hose Company. Okay, so we got that. All right, so they moved from this church to that church. You can spend a whole day talking about any one of these churches. Beautiful Tiffany windows inside. In fact, I want to mention that, so these Tiffany windows are a memorial to our World War I memorial to 3 congregants who died in World War I. Tomorrow, I believe on our blog, we're going to be posting a big article with pictures of all the World War I memorials that we're aware of in town. So you might want to check it out. And they suffered a terrible fire in 1975 that ripped through the sanctuary. And amazingly, only one little piece of the Tiffany windows was dislodged, and it was found in a tree outside. And they painstakingly put it back, and they cleaned all the stained glass windows we heard today with Q-tips. So that's how meticulous. They take tremendous care of this building. When we go there on the tour, they're always taking care of this building. So as you can see, it is a landmark. All right, so what happened to their old church? It became the Commonwealth Club. And so this was the original Union Congregational Church on Valley Road. In 1904, the Commonwealth Club was organized as an antidote to plans to open a saloon in Upper Montclair. So they formed this social club to keep men away from spirits, because there was a lot of drinking going on in Montclair apparently in the late 1800s. There were 48 saloons in Montclair in 1894. It was, so they changed, soon after that, they changed it. So it was much more expensive to get licenses and things like that. And the number of saloons went down drastically. But so the Commonwealth Club took this over. So they had this whole church. They used that as a big ballroom. They built this little clubhouse on the end of it. This is the clubhouse that we would know today if you were in there, where the bowling alley is. And here's where Benjamin Moore comes into play. In the early 1900s, the Commonwealth Club was in dire straits, and Benjamin Moore became their financial angel and saved them. The Commonwealth Club also owned lots of property further south on Valley Road, where the Commonwealth Gardens are. That was their cricket and baseball field. But so then in 1984, they had a terrible fire here. And so all that remained was the little clubhouse. All this was knocked down. So all that remains is the clubhouse back here. So it no longer fronts all the way to Valley Road. This is Valley Road. Now their address is on Northview Avenue. So this is the Commonwealth Club. The Valley Road frontage was developed. And also on Valley Road, there is this little, right here, there is this little Revolutionary War Park marking the log cabin used by General Marquis de Lafayette during the Revolutionary War. He and George Washington are said to have been in Montclair for a couple weeks. In October 1780, Lafayette was planning a surprise attack on the British in Staten Island. It never came to be due to weather conditions and the timing of boats not arriving on time and things like that. But so according to the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1938, this was the doorstep of the house he stayed in. And we'll finish up by looking at Cliffside Chapel. What started as Cliffside Chapel is now St. James Episcopal Church. So this chapel was built in 1878 as Cliffside Chapel. It was a non-denominational space. A lot of back and forth, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, whatever. Now it's an Episcopal church. By 1888, it was Episcopal. And you can see it started out with a steeple, but then by 1922, they had, well, in 1919, it was replaced with this memorial bell tower. Again, another memorial to those who served and lost their lives in World War I. The addition, the bell tower and an addition to the church were designed by Nelson. It is a landmark, and it's very unusual because this is a bell tower on a church, but there's a lot of, well, for one thing, the bells are inscribed with the names of the 7 congregants who lost their lives. There's also above the door, there's the U.S., the seal of the United States, and the cornerstone says "For God and Country." There's other iconography and symbols here, which if you read the blog tomorrow, there's more detail about connections to World War I, which unusual, but was not unusual in 1919 after such a traumatic, the Great War, which they thought was going to be the last one. And I think that's our big finish there. So now if anybody has any questions, Lisa Ann, if you want to pipe in, if I skipped over anything you thought I should have included, or if anybody has questions for Lisa Ann or me, let us know.
Lizanne, do you remember the one reason why, the other reason that Helen left off about Mount Hebron?
I would have to actually check my notes to be precise about this, but my vague recollection is that one of the founders of Mount Hebron Cemetery was honoring his wife with some piece of scripture that mentioned Mount Hebron, and there was a reason he chose that line of scripture, but I can't remember what it is without checking my notes.
Okay. Montclair Savings, it comes back again, Helen.
Oh my God, no, what?
Montclair Savings.
I'm ready.
Montclair Savings used to be in the Art Deco building. That was the diner, the VD, that it was a drive-through. Does that ring a bell to anybody?
So you're saying after it was a diner, it became a bank branch?
Yes, I believe that's right. Is that right, Jeff?
That's what I recall, taking my passbook there.
One more
All right,
to look up.
Yeah, so I don't know what to say about that. So yeah, the banks and the churches are super confusing. And so you really got to have a stack of city directories and a bunch of notes to figure it out. So I don't know that one off the top of my head one way or the other, but
we'll believe you.
Yeah, you brought your passbook there, probably was, we'll believe you.
And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is the blog that Helen has mentioned a couple of times. If you go on our website, montclairhistory.org, you will see, if you scroll down a little bit, you will see something that says Montclair History blog or Montclair, I don't remember what it says, news, but there are a whole bunch of blogs that we have written over the course of the last couple of years, and we've been making them available to you now. The one tomorrow is going to be specifically on for Memorial Day, so you'll be able to see some of these memorials to the fallen soldiers. But there's a lot of other fun stuff there, so feel free to peruse it, and hope you find something you enjoy in there. Anybody have any other questions? That was all that was in the chat room. Well, thank you all for coming very much. Always appreciate it. Hope to see you next week. Same time, same station. And we'll be talking about the 1918 flu. So hope to see you there. All right, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye. Great.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.